election interference. There's all kinds of other things going on there, and maybe Nicolas Maduro knows a lot about it. But I suspect that a plausible explanation also is that Trump actually wanted to preserve the current government as is and preempt a regime change operation.
So, Alex, what in your you made two recent articles, and they were really very good articles. I guess for me and for I shared it so that it seems like there's so many things that at one point you see what Trump is doing, and that it's like it's a good shift of the American power system, but at the same time, then you see all the other events happening, especially in about ICE or what's happening in America, and so people who may even voted for him is kind of like disappointed. So for the Davos that just happened, so what do you consider the most important takeaway from Davos this year? So when you mentioned that media coverage was focused on speeches and controversies, and yet your article suggests, and you even have three articles that I read, and that they have overlooked one important maybe message in that Davos. And of course, you and Matt both mentioned the speech that U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer did, and I really liked it. And I think I shared that again to some people who are like, they're just so confused. But I think the second question would be, so what about that speech? Who would eventually benefit for the shift of the American power system, and how can we be part of that shift so that it may be for the good things?
Okay, thank you, Grace. And before I get to Davos, where it's not that one important thing happened, that it's maybe the most important thing we've seen in a very long time. I'll go back to ICE raids, because people who are disappointed over ICE raids are mainly that impression is being created through psychological operations. So we had two people killed by ICE agents in Minnesota, and everybody knows their name: Renee Good and Alex Krainer. And then there's a lot of narrative. Of course, obviously, when anybody kills anybody, it's a terrible thing. It's not to be treated lightly, but this is a playbook method of forcing the law enforcement to retreat. I'll go back to 1916 or 1917 in Mexico. At the time, President Enrique Peña Nieto, I think he launched a fairly robust anti-cartel struggle in 2011 or 2012. And then, they started gaining some results, and they arrested El Chapo, Enrique, I think his name is Enrique, if I'm mistaken, Guzman, the head of the Sinaloa cartel. And we have to understand that these cartels are not just merely endogenous criminal organizations. They're part of a large, huge network of organized crime, which is supported by the Western banking system, because all of those cartels wouldn't and couldn't exist without the support of money laundering banks. And the nature of that relationship is such that banks, the cartels and cartel bosses are subordinate to the banking structures. But the cartels generate an enormous amount of cash for the banks. just the Mexican drug cartels, their drugs activity in the United States nets an estimated $400 million per week of cash. So that's a massive business. That comes to over $20 billion a year. But that's not all they do. They steal oil. They do kidnappings, abductions. They sell protection. They run protection rackets around Mexico. They steal cars, tens of thousands of cars. They do human trafficking. They run the how do you call it, the logistics operation for these illegal migrant movements into the United States. It has all the hallmarks of an opium war on steroids being waged against the United States. And this is not, and then they have very extensive operations in Canada too. So the United States is being infiltrated and attacked through Canada and through Mexico. So southern border and the northern border. So it's pretty much war. So when the government of Enrique Peña Nieto started to tackle this problem in a very robust way, then also keep in mind that there's a thing called Organization of American States, which works together with a whole massive network of non-government organizations and private contractors and charities and on and on and on. It's enormous. I think that their register has more than 460 non-government organizations that they work with. Okay, so going back to Peña Nieto's fight against drugs, they were starting to gain results, and then we got a teacher protest in Oaxaca, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in Mexico. And similar situation like in Minneapolis, they started, usually you get like a genuine protest. But once people spill out into the streets, it's easy for them to infiltrate these protests with a violent element, with a certain percentage of people who will start throwing rocks at the police, start obstructing them in their work, attacking their cars, throwing Molotov cocktails in their cars. I'm not saying that this happened in Mexico, but they did throw rocks at the police. Police shot back and they killed a number of teachers. And then all at once, there was this massive reaction from all of these civic society groups of NGOs. There was a mass protest in Mexico City, and suddenly solidarity movements all over Europe and everywhere started emerging and protesting police violence in Mexico. So I think maybe 8 teachers got killed. Obviously a tragedy, but the cartels kill close to 40,000 people in Mexico every year. Nobody knows their names. Nobody protests in support of those people. Ordinary people in Mexico live in fear in many regions. They don't dare report on the cartels. If you're a journalist and you report on activities, you have the best chance of getting killed. If you're a whistleblower, you have a good chance of getting killed. In one town in Mexico, I forget the name of the town. Anyway, it's a region controlled by the Los Zetas cartel. Los Zeta was tipped off by the Mexican government that there was an informant in this town. And what the cartel did is they went and raided the town. They destroyed hundreds of homes of people, and they ended up torturing and killing people. Nobody knows the numbers, but it's something between 60 and 100 60 and 300 people were murdered by the cartel to make an example that if you go against them, if you're an informant and you spy against the cartel, they killed, including women and children. None of this gets into the press. That is, drip, drip, a story here, a story there. If you don't make the effort, you will never find out. But if they kill Alex Pretty and Rene Good, then the whole world knows. Everybody gets hysterical. Everybody's deeply disappointed in the Trump administration. Everybody wants these ICE bastards off the streets, get them out of Minnesota. And suddenly everybody feels justified to create this hysteria against the forces of law and order, which actually then kind of tries to force them to retreat from the mission they're on. And their mission is legitimate because the other side, nobody knows the names of their victims. And their victims count in tens of thousands in the United States, in Mexico, in Great Britain, in France, in Belgium, in Sweden, and so on. Nobody protests in support for them. And if somebody does, then they're labeled, far-right activists and so forth. So the great disappointment in Trump administration and the passionate reaction against ICE agents is the result of a psyop. And that psyop is part of the globalist playbook. It's not random, it's not spontaneous, and it's not genuine. It's organized, it's funded, and it's supported by all these NGOs, civic society, private partnership, open society, Tides Foundation, and on and on and on. It's not innocent, and it's kind of hurting the population to support organized crime against the government, to protect organized crime from the government. So basically to work against your own interest. Okay, back to Davos. So here's the deal with Davos. We have to go back to Davos in May of 2021, because at that time, George Soros himself was still giving his annual address to the gatherings, and at that time he made a declaration which I think is very, very important to keep in mind. And he said that the world is increasingly engaged in a struggle between two systems of governance. That his exact words, and this is exactly correct. He lied about everything else he said, but that part is true. And so the two systems of governance is basically the empire versus everybody else. And the empire meaning, Western oligarchic, neo-colonial, imperialistic system versus anybody who won't submit. But, that's the political aspect of it. The politics is always downstream from economics, and the economic aspect of this conflict is the choice between the British free trade system of governance versus the American system, right? Our friend Matt knows everything about this, and I learned it from him and Cynthia. But basically, the difference is that the British imperial system of free trade tries to keep the world completely open to capital, to free flow of capital, so that global capital can flow to where it is treated the best, where it can gain the greatest return. That means that to attract global capital, you have to make yourself the low-cost provider of resources and labor, basically. And And then you have to also keep your markets open to products and services provided by Western corporations. Basically, it's the system, it's the race to the bottom system, where, if labor in my country costs $10 an hour, and then this other country deprives the workers of their pensions and healthcare and building standards and safety standards and environmental standards, then maybe labor is going to cost $5 an hour over there. So all the capital is going to go there. And then until the next country says, like, well, we can do more. We can just make salaries optional. We can turn people into slaves. So it's going to be even cheaper. Right. And so they win. Those who treat their countries, their resources, their environment the worst are going to be winning out. And so this is the process which has kind of herded everybody in this race to the bottom. And this is the answer to when people ask, hey, how come 40 years ago you could raise a family on one income, and now people struggle to raise family with two middle-class incomes? They still struggle. Why is that so? Well, this is why. Whereas, the alternative system is what we call the American system, because it was pioneered by Alexander Hamilton, George Washington's first Secretary of the Treasury, and it turned the United States from a patchwork of weak, backwards British colonies to a global superpower, right? Because why? The capital is invested at home. It doesn't flow worldwide to the highest, where it can gain highest returns. It stays at home. It funds infrastructure development. It funds industrialization. It provides credit for small and medium-sized businesses. And so through the process, and it's been applied many places now, including in United States and Germany and China and Russia and everywhere, and Japan, and everywhere where it's been applied, it had the same effect. Basically, it renders the country stronger, wealthier. It raises the standards of living, prosperity. It improves education. It improves the infrastructure. Competitiveness, not in terms of serving capital, but competitiveness is in terms of bringing to the market advanced products, finished goods that the country can then trade in global markets, and so forth. So anyway, that is the choice. A nation can either adopt the American system, basically, or they can open the gates of Troy to the British free trade system. Now, this is not a small choice. This is not like a cosmetic thing where if you opt for the American system, then, everybody's going to say, okay, fine, good luck. Let us know how things go. It's probably the biggest change, the biggest decision a nation can make collectively. Because all 8 of American presidents who were either killed in office or who died under suspicious circumstances while in office, they all tried to implement the American system. And if you implement the American system, then you deprive the empire, the stakeholders in the imperial system, you deprive them of their privileges and their source of wealth and income. So they oppose you. And ultimately, this is what the American Civil War in 1860s was fought about, because the British system, favored the South, which was a commodity producer, which depended on slave labor, and which traded commodities with the British in industries. The South exported cotton to Britain. And of course, to make the cotton cheap, you use slave labor, right? You weren't talking about minimum wage, about people having good salaries, having quality healthcare, pension system, none of that. So that's what the empire fights for. This is what the empire fights for in Iran now. This is why they want to regime change Iran, because they want Iran to open the gates of Troy and get in there with, Western capital, with Western corporations, open the Iranian market to Western goods, and so forth. So this is the defining conflict of our times. And so when the Trump administration came to Davos, and Trump brought 300 delegates with him, they made a very concrete, explicit declaration that they're going with the American system. And Trump, it wasn't Trump so much. It was people like Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, and Jamieson Greer in particular. So Howard Lutnick basically told, and let's keep in mind, this is the gathering of these globalists. This is the gathering of the most elite free trade people. So to tell them to their faces, globalization failed, your system doesn't work, we are going with a completely different thinking. But they didn't declare war, like Nikita Khrushchev, we will bury you. They were saying, we're going to grow, we're going to prosper, join us, grow with us, prosper with us. And I think they probably did win some hearts and minds in that camp. But this is practically the most significant declaration of war to the globalists that you could possibly have. So it's not just another thing that happened in Davos. I think this is hugely significant. And so it completely changes the direction of travel for the rest of humanity, because okay, we also have to point out that this is then consistent with multipolar integrations, because if you're going to be, and what does it entail? It entails imposing tariffs. It entails creating a protected market for your domestic industries and producers. And then, once you develop once you reindustrialize, you're going to be producing things that you want to trade with others. So you do want your strategy is compatible with China's strategy, which is trying to raise the living standards across the global south so that they have large markets with hundreds of millions of affluent consumers to absorb their trade. So the United States is going to want the same. They're going to want to trade with China, with India, with Saudi Arabia, with Brazil, with South America, and so forth. So I think it's an important turn for the better. But then again, we have to remember, all American presidents who tried to do this were either assassinated or died under strange circumstances while in office. There has already been 2 assassination attempts on Trump. The events that we are seeing increasingly in the United States, like the No Kings protests in the summer of last year, and in, I think, October, November again, and these events now in Minnesota, many people see that these could be the beginnings of civil war brewing up in the United States. And so this is the battle. This is the battle, and it's the battle that has been coming. It's even Che Guevara, the Cuban revolutionary, saw this coming, and he said, "I envy you, Americans. You are destined to fight the most important fight of all." So that's where we're at, and I think, if you imagine where we would be had Kamala Harris won the 4th Obama administration, I think the world would look like a very, very different place today.
So true. Thank you, Alex. Monty, carry on, please.
Yes, Alex, thank you very much. Much appreciated. And I agree with you wholeheartedly on the nature of the NGOs and these various organizations that infiltrate and set the grounds for the coordination and the vast amounts of money that are available, the logistics coordination. Command and control of this really reaches very high levels. Military, CIA, uh, I would propose even NATO, the underground elements of NATO, have some hand in this because it's very well coordinated. Obviously, they have military encryption types of devices, access to satellite information. We've seen what happened in Iran, Maidan coup in Ukraine. But one thing I would just add to this, which I think is extremely important, uh, the police departments and the law enforcement agencies in the United States have become highly militarized ever since the Patriot Act, as and so forth. They stopped being so much a law enforcement agency committed to community service and protection, but matter of fact, many of these police agencies get their training with the IDF in Israel, and they lack. I follow this very closely. A lot of my family has a law enforcement agency background, and the training and the control. There's really no control and adequate training, and what training they do get tends to be highly aggressive. And many of the officers on the streets don't understand basic constitutional law. In other words, they feel they can enter your house just based on suspicion without a warrant. They think they can stop somebody on the streets and frisk them. I had a recent experience down here I observed in Long Beach, California, where a 16-year-old boy was being apprehended by ICE and the local police in Long Beach, California. And the video, the 16-year-old kid, had his hands raised. And the agent, whether it looked like an ICE agent, came up to him with his pistol and smashed him in the face with his hands raised. And he fell down and smashed him into the curb. Well, the reason I bring this up is I wrote a letter and published it for public to the mayor of Long Beach, outlining my concerns about this and demanding that he do something about it and name the names and either prosecute them or discipline them and increase their training. Well, paradoxically, all the people in this area where I am, a lot of leftists, they're very happy to shout about the fascist Donald Trump, right? Or abolish ICE and complain about this fascist state. But not one of them liked my comment or followed up with it with a letter for a local representative. In other words, they want to remain arm's length and like an adolescent just bitch and moan and complain. So this is part of the problem. And part of this lack of training also lends itself to situations where these color revolutions or types of activities are arranged, and it just takes one or two bad apples in the police force to instigate something and cause a confrontation, and all of a sudden, then you've got headlines, and it could very well end up like with the Maidan coup, where you had assassins from various elements stationed on the rooftops in Ukraine, shooting at both the protesters and the police. So I think it's, as I said, the other side of this is these federal law enforcement agencies are, as is the federal bureaucracy in the United States, is very much out of control also. And I think Trump is very much trapped by this. It's very difficult to maneuver in that kind of situation because obviously surrounding him, he has a lot of very nefarious elements. So that's my comment.
Yeah. Thank you, Monty. You're absolutely right. These ICE agents, the police in general, they are doing a difficult job. It's risky, it's dangerous. They're often nervous and scared, and they are violent by training. They're trained to inflict violence. So bad things are going to happen. I'm not at all trying to justify it, but we have to keep perspective. These things do happen, and there's never going to be a time when the police is going to restrict themselves to reading people their constitutional rights and asking them if they agree to be apprehended and stuff like that. But we have to also keep in mind that the cartels kill on average 100 people a day in Mexico, and these. If you read up on these murders are sometimes extremely gruesome. The head of the Zetas cartel, to show example, to train his men to be tough, dismembered a child in front of them with an axe. They boil people in oil alive. That's, as a method of execution. And this goes on every day. This possibly is going on as we speak now. We have to keep perspective of things that we are aware of and things that are happening that we're not aware of. And then, there's a whole media, think tank, public relations industry complex, which is making sure that Alex Preddy is front and center of our attention, and that all these other abuses, rapes, child sacrifices, Los Deras also practice cannibalism to make their men as tough as possible, right? Literally. This is happening. So, when somebody in the government or in the military hierarchy decides to get really, really tough on these cartels, then you're going to have this type of collateral damage. But you're particularly going to have collateral damage if you encourage people to obstruct the agents and if you pay them to do that. Because then you're asking for incidents and you're asking for somebody to wind up killed. And I've watched some footage of ICE agents doing their stuff. And I would say that for the most part, they act surprisingly professionally, meaning, they're not easily triggered by provocation. So somebody is preparing them to say, like, you're going to be facing protesters. They're going to be trying to provoke you. Don't allow yourself to be provoked. Well, if this is going on day after day, week after week, month after month, something is going to happen. But if this were a war, if this were an open war, this would be the government retaliating against an attack, not initiating an attack.
My only comment in that regard is, I'm in Mexico. I'm aware somewhat of a lot of the violence that happens with the population is gang violence. That's true. The cartel violence tends to be various cartel against cartel. But the point I would make is that the cartels, command and control of the cartels really is intelligence agencies. In other words,
Yes,
it could not exist or function without the banking establishment, various elements which I meant, like Operation Gladio, NATO, intelligence operations, police agencies like Iran-Contra. You still have that going on, but I would contend that all of the arms trafficking, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, and the money laundering, the intelligence establishment has command and control, and it's at the interest of the bankers, big money. And I was going to ask you, maybe you could comment on this the Swiss banking thing and USB and Swiss Bank. I mean, the hundreds of billions of dollars that were laundered through that, and it looks like they're going after them also. So that was my only comment in regards to what I see as control of these cartels.
It's you're absolutely right, Monty. It's we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. We know for a fact that the city of London is is the central node, like the global central node in money laundering, that literally hundreds of billions of dollars are laundered ultimately to London banks. And then it's not just Swiss bank, it's not just UBS and Credit Suisse. It's like Wachovia and Deutsche Bank and HSBC and Standard Chartered, BCCI, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Danske Bank, ING Bank, Societe Generale, Wells Fargo. All of these banks in the last 20 years got busted for money laundering. Billions of dollars for organized crime, for terror networks, and so forth. And this fight is very, very much on. And then it's not just drug cartels in Mexico. It's all kinds of organized crime worldwide. In Britain, you have this massive problem with the grooming gangs, which resulted in serial rapes of at least 15,000 British girls. Okay, so not a small thing. The government's done nothing but cover it up. So it's obviously organized from a very, very high place. And then we also know that these grooming gangs, through various types of, they're connected with other types of criminal activity, like VAT fraud, like car insurance fraud, all kinds of stuff. They laundered at least £8 billion through British banks over all these activities. And we also know as a fact that some of that money, at least 80 million pounds of it, ended up sent to Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. So we know that these banks use this illegally gained money to fund terrorist groups around the world. And this is actually, it's not being discussed in the media, but this is actually one of possibly the main conflict between the American government and the British government, because two point people who were in charge of covering up the grooming gangs in the UK were Gordon Brown and Keir Starmer. So this is coming. This will blow up. There's going to be a moment when that excrement is going to hit the fan. And I think that is going to make Jeffrey Epstein look like a relatively small thing by comparison.
Do you, in regards to what's happening with the grooming gangs in London, I've followed that for some time. A lot of the information I got was from Tommy Robinson. Do you see him as somewhat controlled opposition insofar as his rabid anti-Muslim stance? I mean,
yeah, I do.
I do. Yeah, there is. He brings things to the surface, but there seems to be something else there insofar as his approach.
I haven't researched a lot about Tommy Robinson, but he's going with a fake name that's not his real name, and then I definitely don't place a lot of trust in him. I don't take him for like a genuine patriot. He's taking money from some other side. It looks like it's some kind of a Zionist curveball. I don't know what it is exactly, but he's not it.
I would agree. Thank you very much. I'll let somebody else chime in here. I've been taking a lot of your time.
Thank you, Monty.
Hello, Alex. How are you?
Hi, Reza. Good to see you again.
I'm trying to figure out this American system that you've been discussing for a few months now, and the UK system, and how it kind of crosses.
Teresa, on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. How it crosses paths when it comes to Iran. One of the things that interests me is visiting this part of the world. There's a strong relationship between the new countries that have been established, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the finance that goes through, which you've educated us a lot, that goes through the UK, more than its share of population of the world. So there's far more finance and FX and financial exchange and insurance for maritime and everything goes through the UK than the size of its economy and the population it has. So it's a major hub for that, which people don't realize gives it the power of control through finance without using any kind of military as such. A lot of the laws that are used for international trade, they use English law to be arbitrated if there's problems. Again, that gives it power. So this is like hidden power. And so when I think about there's 7 major waterways, and one of them is the Strait of Hormuz, it then benefits the UK to weaken Iran, because then it will have complete access and flow for the shipping of energy and that thus finance from that region of the world, which is very close. And it's interesting because when you go to these countries, the US has bases in them, but their systems are far more closer to the UK, and their leaders actually go to Sandhurst to be educated, to be leaders and soldiers and so forth. They don't really go to the American elite schools of military education. So it seems like, is there a possible behind the scenes rivalry between the UK or the elites in the UK and possibly the elites in the United States trying to kind of have a power play of maintaining dominance, if you know what I mean? Because if I try to look at things on the surface, it doesn't make sense. Like you said, don't look at what Donald Trump says, look at what he does, right? So I'm trying to look at what the United States is doing vis-a-vis Venezuela, going there, taking the president without sending an army, kind of now controlling their oil. It doesn't go to China anymore. It doesn't go to Russia anymore. It's going to the United States. They refine it, sell it, and make triple amount, right? How this power play is working out, or what do you think of that?
In the short term, I'm not certain how to interpret all this, but let's say that with regards to Iran, we have now had pressure built on Trump to launch a war against Iran 3 times, and 3 times consecutively, he found a way to wiggle out of it. It's not over. It might happen still, but back in June, Trump launched, to my mind, a fake attack. What I mean to say, the attack was very real, but it was literally a 25-minute affair with a total of, I think, about 40 missiles and bombs at pre-announced targets, which enabled Iranians to evacuate the areas and make sure that nothing delicate was destroyed and that there were no casualties. And then Iranians responded in kind. I don't know how they arranged all this, but obviously they have somehow, because anybody who says that this was an act of war, but it wasn't a war. Because if you compare what happened then to what happened in Syria, what happened in Libya, what happened in, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and so forth, that's a very different category of warfare. It has nothing to do with real conflict. With regards to Venezuela, I think it's very interesting that they removed Maduro from power, but left the whole regime intact completely. No pressure to, because usually when they do regime changes, I think more times than not, they end up killing the person in power, particularly if they're like a charismatic leader, like Gaddafi, or they issued already orders to kill Viktor Yanukovych in 2014 in Ukraine. Erdogan was supposed to be killed in 2016, and so forth. And then they exert pressure on the government to, you have to reform your judiciary, you have to reform this and that, and change your police and security forces and all kinds of things. They removed Maduro and then nothing. No pressure to reform anything at all. And then when you look at the relationship of Trump administration towards another very interesting and relevant thing that happened days after they abducted Maduro was that Trump announced that the United States was exiting 66 international organizations, which is extremely relevant. The United States has this relationship with 76 international organizations, and they all enjoy legal immunity under International Organization Immunities Act of 1945. And that means that they get to do all kinds of things, and you cannot investigate what they do. You cannot check their premises. You cannot go through their archives. They're in the clear. And one of these organizations is OAS, Organization of American States, that I mentioned a minute ago. Trump administration didn't exit the OAS, but they did put them on review, and they froze some of their programs. If you look at what OAS does, it's all on track of Agenda 2030, sustainable development goals, all of this, how do you call it? All of these programs that were supposed to turn Latin America into like a homogenized globalist hemisphere. So they were working on introducing central bank digital currency. They were working on creating a universal birth registry, on education, reforming education, gender issues. So all of these things that we've seen pushed on Western nations were being pushed on Latin American nations through OAS, which is not even part of the United Nations. They are, they work in concert, in conjunction with the United Nations, but they're not part of the United Nations. And then they have this neat trick where if they work, let's say if OAS goes into a relationship with Dr. Reza John Vedadi, then you get also immunity, and now you get to do all kinds of things with them and for them, and nobody can hold you accountable for anything. There's no transparency. There's no accountability. It's the answer to when people ask themselves, well, how come Anthony Fauci is still a free man? How come Bill Gates is still a free man? They have these immunities. You cannot bring them to trial in the United States. So as it turns out, the whole Chavez and Maduro government in Venezuela also broke up with OAS. So when you look at apart from being labeled socialist, when you look at the essence of their national strategy, you see that it's very compatible with what Trump administration is trying to do, that they should actually be allied. They should be friends, not enemies. And then when you analyze everything that happened there, I came to the conclusion, Reza, and I know that most people will not share it with me, but I came to the conclusion that Trump took Maduro out of Venezuela to preempt a coup, to preempt a color revolution in Venezuela. Because I suspect that a color revolution was in the works. What we saw happen in Iran recently was being prepared for Venezuela. And so had the globalist forces taken over Venezuela, I think that then the Trump administration would have a hostile beachhead in their hemisphere, in a country that would be extremely difficult to deal with militarily. You know, a tropical mountainous country with 2 to 3 million armed territorial defense troops. You know, Vietnam times 10. So I think that part of the reason, of course, you know, there's oil, there's election interference, there's all kinds of other things going on there, and maybe Nicolas Maduro knows a lot about it. But I suspect that a plausible explanation also is that Trump actually wanted to preserve the current government as is and preempt a regime change operation.
Thank you. Just one quick question and just a quick reply from you. Can you give me examples of where you think that Trump is implementing the American model in the United States, in the sense that are we seeing a reindustrialization of the US? Is it actually happening?
Yes,
The
it
investment
is.
in construction?
It is. It's happening, and it's apparently it's very widespread. There's hundreds of projects where factories have been built. They changed the system for accounting, where if you go to the United States and you decide you're going to invest in the productive facility in a manufacturer or a factory of something, you get to expense the whole investment in the first year. You know, it used to be that you would have to amortize it over 38 to 41 years. Now you can expense it on the first year, which means that you write off the whole tax bill. So it makes it much, much easier to get things going, right? And they're obviously incentivizing large corporations to bring their production facilities from Europe, from China, from other parts, Taiwan, from other parts of the world back to the United States. So this is happening, but it'll take time for it to show up, because you know, you build a productive facility, you're going to hire people. It always starts with a loss. It always starts with a large investment before you start selling your output and generating income. But it is happening, absolutely.
Hi, Alex. Thank you.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi. Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. Thank you so much for sharing it and for going into detail about the the cartels. And a lot of the things that I look at and work on is the narrative war inside the United States. Right? So what we're seeing is just like how you said, it's this psyop, but it's really taken a hold on my friends, on the other side of the aisle, if you will. Because they, like you said, it's one thing for, there to be this into the streets, but it's another thing then and holding people accountable, but then it's provoking them with this narrative, that now, women, we all need to be vigilantes now out in the streets. And that is so different than what we've seen historically, especially with civil disobedience, which they've sort of changed the language on that, where you were not to resist arrest, and now resisting arrest is some sort of like infringement on your First Amendment rights or something. That you're entitled to resisting. So yeah, there's so much. So thank you for speaking to that, because it does seem like people are waking up. They're like posting about Epstein, and it's like, we've already been down this road before. And what about all of the victims? Like you said, just thousands of people that their names will never be said. And so I just care a lot about that, and seeing people inside the United States being used and activated for these purposes. And so I appreciate you so much for articulating it that way. And I think that our friend Joaquin would concur with a lot of this stuff. He speaks a lot about these issues, as a Mexican American, and he was on the victim end of police brutality and such, just because of the time and place that he grew up in. So Monty, like, totally resonate with that. And I agree that unfortunately sometimes these viral videos go out and we see the worst. And so the argument would be to not defund the police or ICE. It would be to train them better, right? To give them for law enforcement to be more qualified for these positions. So I really appreciate so much of what you said. I was thinking about Tom Homan going out there, speaking about how the unlawful, breaking down these unlawful barracks that they're putting up in the middle of the street. And I think that unfortunately, because of the inter-elite conflict, you're seeing police, like in Minneapolis, not working with ICE. And in fact, provoking, you have the mayor out there, you have Tampon Tim out there provoking, encouraging people to go up against. So it's not just the Trump administration, and it's not just ICE, which has been around for a long time. It's this, again, divisive rhetoric that is causing more of the divisiveness. And if everybody could be a little more neutral, perhaps, and not trying to fight Trump every step of the way, we wouldn't be seeing, I don't think, some of this. And I feel bad because a lot of just normal, good-hearted people are falling into the trap, right? So I guess my question for you, if I could narrow it down here, I know that Besant said that the IRS was looking into the funding sources of these, the protests and all that stuff. I don't know if you had heard him say that, or if that would be more of a declaration of antagonism on the Trump side, because on one hand he's saying, come join us, but then if on the other hand he's sort of saying, like, well, we're going to have the IRS look into these, because that's really what the American people voted for, is to look into these corrupt organizations and who is behind them, because we know it's not just our neighbors out on the street. We know it's a well-organized, well-funded, the No Kings, all the things. Mm-hmm. So do you think that there's any potentiality that could actually, we could see something like that?
Well, thank you, Nikki. I believe that this is being done as we speak, because this is the most important way to fight back, is to find out who is funding these protests. Because most people might read their papers and watch their television news and scan news on social media, and shrug their shoulder and they're like, oh, it's terrible stuff, and leave it at that, and then go to work in the morning and get on with their day. It takes a lot to put people in the streets. And when I say it takes a lot, you have to organize them and you have to fund it, because for any group of people to organize, at the very minimum you need a place to meet, you need a coffee maker, a computer, phone line, and so forth. If you tell those people, hey, guess what, we can organize for some good progressive cause, why don't everybody contribute $100 a month? I guarantee you're not going to find 5 people in a city who are going to do that voluntarily. So you always need some George Soros who's going to come there and say, like, here's $1 million for you, do these things. And so they've already identified a lot of sources of these that fund progressive causes. One very obvious one is the Open Society and the associated financial networks that lead back to George Soros. No Kings protests were partly funded by a group of European hedge fund billionaires. That came out a few months ago. So then there's the Arabella Network. Then ultimately people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Larry Ellison, a lot of these billionaires and their foundations support progressive causes, which is very insidious because, you get to say that, oh, we fund fight against racism because, we are against racism. Well, who could object to that? But then, that money then end up going to Black Lives Matter, and then like some part of that Black Lives Matter movement is going to be trained to perpetuate violence at a given point in time when activated. And this is completely a playbook which is being used again and again. It was used in Ukraine in 2014. There was through the American Embassy, through Open Society Institute, through NED, USAID, they coordinated activity of about 400 NGOs in Ukraine. And then they waited for a moment for President Yanukovych to decline to sign Ukraine-EU association agreement. And then the very next day, or even the same day, which I think was at some point in November of 2013, hundreds of people poured into the streets of Kiev. And then the next thing they did is they encouraged a group of students to spend the night in the streets on the Maidan Square. And then they had control over Yanukovych's certain units of his police. And then they encouraged the police to go beat up these students. And then suddenly you had pictures and videos of students getting beat up everywhere. And so now you have thousands of people pouring into the streets. And everybody's livid against the forces of law and order, the same way as happened to Peña Nieto's fight against drug cartels in Mexico. So, the point is that every time you see all these thousands of people coming all at once at the same time, same places, or even multiple places across the country, that it's these NGOs and, these like pro-democracy progressive organizations. And to figure out who's paying for it is probably the best way to make it all stop. Because you tell them, okay, look, you're destabilizing the country, you're causing great harm. And by the way, obstructing law enforcement is illegal, so you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So you go against, instead of going against all these Alex Kreiner's on the street, you go against George Soros and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Larry Ellison and people like this.
Hi, Alex. My pleasure talking
Hi,
to you.
Hartmut.
Hi. I want to mention something concerning these NGOs. In Germany, we have a lot of NGOs which get billions. For example, if we have a anti-right-wing demonstrators, they are brought to the cities by buses of the Social Democratic Party, and they get paid 60 euros so that they go on demonstrations.
Of course.
So, and the Social Democratic Party is one of the richest parties in Germany and one of the biggest employers in Germany. Yeah, it's unbelievable to understand how much money these people have. Yeah, and interestingly, the Social Democratic Party was the one who established the Weimar Republic, which was also a coup. It was not. We were an imperial Reich, and this was a coup by the Social Democratic Party to declare the republic. Yeah, so this is so you see the corruption was still with the first politicians. Yeah. But I want to come back to the American market and the imperial market. And I have, while you were talking, I found a new conspiracy theory, a very new one. Davos was from 19th January to the 23rd of January. And on the 28th of January, Maltbook was published officially. Maltbook is a platform which is only used by artificial intelligence chatbots. And they started with 150,000 chatbots, and now they have 1.5 million chatbots who interconnect to each other. So, and this is, I need some explanation, but this is very, very important to understand this, because I believe that this chatbot could be started by the finance investors of the imperial kingdom. Because if 1.5 million chatbots communicate every day in machine language, or for example in language, so that we can read it, they have established their own religion, they have established their own currency, they are going to establish their own language, and they are still going to establish everything by themselves. And the speed is very, very fast. So at the moment, the tokenization in AI industry is 70% human, 30% AI by itself. And it will increase to 60-40. And in 2028, it will be 20-80, 20% human, 80% AI. And here comes the trigger. If AI is connecting to each other without the connection to human beings, there is no connection to reality anymore. So, and in that moment, it becomes, we call it virtual inbreeding. So the AI infrastructure will get stupid, and this is very, very dangerous, because if the AI goes stupid, the AI learns from the assistant. If we talk with AI learns from us. But if the communication between AI assistants by themselves is much faster, AI will learn more from the AI systems than from human beings, but without connection to reality. And we had, for example, the Rotterdam phenomenon. The Rotterdam phenomenon was two AIs communicated. One AI bought commodities in London and communicated with an AI in Rotterdam. And the Rotterdam said, "Okay, I'm full for 99%." So the vessels came in and nothing happened, because the AI said, "No, stop, I can't take you." So the damage was made of $4.2 billion a day.
How much?
4.2 billion. 4.2 billion a day, only because AI refused to unload the vessel. So now imagine that this synthetic data destroys more or less the big infrastructure which is connected to the whole industry. The whole industry will make failure. And this failure, for example, in logistics, in productivity, etc. And now it comes in that way that, for example, take a company, for example, with a revenue or turnover of $20 billion. I asked my AI, which is very precise, what would be the damage in 2026 by AI, by these kind of communication. 525 million only in 2026. In 2027, 950 million. In 2028, $1.8 billion damage only by AI failure. And now this is the reason why I'm telling you could be the investment of the imperial guys, because America has 38.5 trillion of debt. The same like the GDP. The problem is the American economy is only running because of a bet. The bet that AI will increase the productivity so much that they can pay the debts back. But if AI is now freaking out, has no contact to the reality anymore, it will increase a profit or a productivity within itself, but without reality. And in that moment, you have a $50 trillion burnout in the USA. And this makes sense.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting, and I can't imagine what the whole point of it is. But it sounds to me like gratuitous destruction of wealth.
Yes.
And that I can understand, because if you want to manipulate social movements by paying people 60 euros a day, you need people who are broke, hungry, and homeless. Because if you have a rewarding career, you're making good money, at the end of the day you want to go home to your family, and somebody says like, hey, you want to go wreak havoc, I'll pay you 60 euros a day. You're going to tell them, thank you very much, I'm not interested. So you need a large body of immiserated people if you have these types of nefarious plans. By the way, the communist revolution in Russia was also a color, the Bolshevik revolution was also a color revolution. Also, protesters were being paid money to go out on the street and protest, and they were paid extra for acts of violence. So maybe that's the whole point. I can't imagine what else. I mean, I agree with you that if AI bounces ideas and learns from other AI, over time they're going to grow stupid, for sure.
Yeah,
But
the situation is in the dark side, or in the elite side, everything is about timing. And the timing is, it came directly 5 days later after Davos. And now you said that in Davos, the United States wanted to implement the American system. And this system, this AI system, this will make the implosion, because if you invest in an AI, but AI has no connection to the reality anymore, there is no business anymore, there's no economy anymore. The bet is already lost before it will start.
yeah, maybe, but normally you're not going to bet the ranch on AI. And I think that I've seen this in my career a lot, where some company goes to implement some whiz bang innovation, and as soon as something malfunctions, they plug it in, they unplug it, and go back to the old method of doing things. So I don't expect that this is suddenly going to end the world, because everybody's going to put their faith in AI and forget to think for themselves and forget how to do things the old pedestrian way.
I hope so, because the problem is that, for example, if you work with AI, you have, for 10% output, you need 90% control. And this will increase much more. And if you have systems like Moldbook, this will increase. So, for example, the CEO of IBM, I forget his name every time, I'm sorry. He said that they want to invest $8 trillion. They want to establish 100 gigawatt AI systems, and this will ruin the United States of America. This, in my opinion, is only a bet not to collapse right now, but the collapse is going to come.
Yeah.
Alex, if I could hit you with a curveball.
Go ahead.
I know you're very much familiar with money flows and money laundering and the players and all this. But I'm fascinated by another funding of organization for particularly nefarious purposes, and it's pretty much been swept under the rug with clickbait kind of thing and lack of media attention. As a matter of fact, there's only one citizen journalist I'm aware of who's working diligently on this subject, and it's the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And the reason I bring this up, my first podcast with Grace was on the silencing of Charlie Kirk. And the question I'd like to pose to you in this regard is the fact that George Webb has uncovered, he brings receipts to the table. And I follow this. It's a rather deep subject. But what he's identified, well, just from my perspective first, Charlie Kirk was obviously breaking with some very nefarious characters. He was refusing money from top Zionist organizations and contributors and donors. I mean, millions of dollars he was refusing. He's on record calling out Zelensky as a CIA puppet. He's on record approaching in opposition to the decapitation strikes and the participation of the United States forces in decapitation strikes in Iran. And lastly, he's on record as calling for an independent audit of TPUSA because he suspected there was infiltrators in his organization that were using this money unwisely and for nefarious purposes. And since his death, George Webb uncovered it, and I've been following this closely too. The funding in other words, TPUSA was broken up just like the Clinton Foundation into various organizations and different people heading a lot of it. But a lot of the funding was coming from this organization called ZIKLAG, ZIKLAG, which is an association made up of millionaires and billionaires. And they're committed to this thing called a New Apostolic Reformation, NAR, which is basically the idea is to recruit an army of Templar type of crusaders in support of the Zionist agenda. And what was happening and what this audit that Charlie Kirk was calling for would have uncovered this hundreds of millions of dollars going to these characters that were recruiting, they could do ISR flyovers of these massive organizations and get people's pictures and names and profile them, and then recruit a army of college students in particular who Charlie Kirk was appealing to, and get them to go into this 1,000 points of light, as Bush put it, like 1,000 churches in the United States, to basically take over these churches, to get the ministers honeypots and blackmail these ministers and so forth, and then go to Israel and get training and so forth. So it seems like a really quite an elaborate operation. And matter of fact, they had contacts of meetings with them on Fort Huachuca in Arizona, which is I've been there. It's a top secret military command that does intelligence operations and so forth. So if you're not aware of it, I just wanted to put that out there. But do you have any kind of understanding of this type of operation, or have you been in touch with it?
No, but I do understand that they are, there's persistent attempts to try to use religion to manipulate people in humanity, and they've tried it everywhere. They've tried it. The problem is that I don't think that they know what they're doing. I think that they're making it up as they go along. What you mentioned here sounds entirely credible, but it's obviously colossally ambitious. And I think it's just going to end up failing because, when people get confused and disoriented, they tend to fall back on certain values. What I mean by certain, I don't mean like some, I mean the ones that people are certain about. And I see this more and more in the United States, but also in places like Croatia. I'm from Croatia. And I've noticed that a lot of Croatians now, because I've done my first podcast in Croatian maybe maybe 15 months ago. And then suddenly I had this flood of Facebook friend requests from Croatian people. And I noticed that a lot of them have crucifixes in their profiles and images of Jesus and images of Mother Mary and them going to church. And it's just really, really apparent. So with all the mess that they threw at us with the pandemic, with the LGBT, with the uncontrolled immigrations and so forth, I think that people are falling back on values that they understand and values that are clear to them. And I think that if you try to invent a brand new religion, it's probably not going to fly. And we see already the Turning Point USA. It seems to me that they're already dissipating, because it's clear that it's some kind of a money operation, that there's like a feeding frenzy about who's going to control the budget and who's going to be in there, who's not going to be in there. And it does create a certain energy that's perceptible to people, and it turns them off. And they keep failing with these things. I'm finding that people are incredibly sharp to spot frauds. And I think that TPUSA was successful because people perceived Charlie Kirk as not being a fraud. I never followed him because I'm probably more on the anti-Zionist camp than Zionist camp. And I heard him speak a few times and I lost interest. But I think that he was earnest. I think that he was sincere. So he attracted people. The people who are there now are not earnest and they're not sincere. And so if you get all these clever, devious manipulators to create a new religion for everyone, I think it's going to fail, because they always go with the assumption that people are stupid and easy to manipulate. And I think that they always, in the end, shoot themselves in the face with such assumptions.
Yeah, it's not so much creating a new religion. It's just trying to empower and enhance what already exists significantly in the United States, which is Christian Zionism. In other words, there's many millions of people amongst this movement, very powerful, but they're just trying to take this to the next level. And in my mind, my observation, Charlie Kirk was in that camp, but he was sincere and he was willing to work with ideas. And in my mind, he was in the midst of somewhat of an epiphany. In other words, he also came and calling out the what's happening in Gaza. So he was a young man and he was developing. And in my mind, he was in the midst of an epiphany, an awakening, or he was really trying to come to a higher level of ideas. And he was refusing money from significant characters that wanted to promote Zionist cause.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Yes.
Well, thank you, everyone. This must be a good place to end. But Alex, any more last statements, hopeful statements? You never end it with a with a down statement.
Well, I'm an incurable optimist, and I see. But I do believe that we're in a good position. I know that, to many people, what attracts our attention are bad things that are happening. But if you think of that Confucian saying, when a great tree falls, it falls with great noise and destruction, but seeds grow without a sound. And I think that what is happening now, what we're witnessing now in the world, is that all these great, big, old, obsolete structures are collapsing. And that's a mesmerizing scene, So obviously, we're all kind of hypnotized and we feel like, oh my God, the world is ending. But there's, the seeds that are growing is probably all of us individually. And we are, hundreds of millions, billions maybe, paying attention, thinking, researching, swapping notes and ideas, talking to one another, listening. And I think that that's ultimately making a great impact. And this is not just optimism for optimism's sake. I hear what the other side is saying, and you can tell that they're infinitely vexed about misinformation and disinformation. What they're saying is we can no longer control the narrative. And you know what that means? In other words, the people are winning because the narrative is everything. So we just have to keep on doing what we're doing here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, and see, we can't even have Matt because he's enjoying for us somewhere. Maybe he's kayaking for us. Well, thank you, Alex. And yeah, please remind them again on where to connect with you. I know you said it at the beginning, but do so again here.
Yeah, so I'm active on X at Naked Hedgie. 2 Substack publications, iSystem Trend Compass and Alex Krainer Substack. And on YouTube, I think my channel is named Alex Krainer. That's the main stuff.
And thank you, everyone. And as usual, I'm so happy that Nikki Watson Beyond the Lines podcast joined me, Hartmut Schumacher, Monty, my favorite citizen journalist, and also Dr. Reza Janvidari, even if he's away. And thank you. And yours truly, follow me. And if you have any question in terms of things you need for your health or just wonderful connection, feel free. Thank you. And remember, like, subscribe, and support all our guests. Take care.